All right. And what I want to do now is, great, Glenn Nader's coming up. So now in the packet that were able to pick up, it had that collection of publications in it. So Glenn Nader and his crew published an article in 2007 on the use of planned herbivory for wildfire fuel. Honestly, in my opinion, that remains one of the best publications on the use of livestock for managing these fuels. So I wanted to make sure that I've drugged Glenn out of retirement to come back and out of youthful and productive retirement to say a few words about that publication. And so I'm gonna use Glenn to lead what's gonna become immediately after a panel discussion. Some of the presenters we'll have another presenter to tell you a bit more about their experience in applying these grazing practices for the purpose of fuels management. But Glenn, I thought would be the one that I wanted to open it up. So Glenn, if you need some time to take it away.
Okay.
And we're going to be working with small screens today.
That's fine. We'll work on your vitamin A and your vision today. It's good to be here. Like all the other speakers, I probably have way too much stuff for my presentation time. So we're going to rock and roll. Hopefully that works for you. First, I'll make sure I know how to operate this thing. So my name's Glenn Nader, not related to Ralph. Damn it, missed out on another one. So I have a little experience in fire. What did I hit? Okay. I was an animal scientist. I worked for cooperative extension with the University of California. And in 1996, they transferred me, or I transferred, down to Sutter County and Butte County. And I was an animal scientist. And in extension, you're supposed to do a needs assessment. Well, within 2 months of hitting that job, I'm an animal scientist. Where we had ranches, we now had subdivisions, and we lost 100 homes. I know that's a trifle amount after Camp Fire and others, but it was still impactful. And so what do I need to do? Well, I decided the best thing for a livestock guy is to get involved with fire safe councils, because that was the active people who lived there that wanted to make a difference. And it allowed us to interface with CAL FIRE and others and start solving problems. So I was the chair of the Butte Fire Safe Council and Yuba Fire Safe Councils, kind of helped get those started. Doggone it, why does it love me that much? The big fat fingers. Over $5 million worth of grants. So we were able to get money and make an impact on the ground. I will say in Yuba County, we were able to document that work stop or help CAL FIRE stop 2 fires. I must say I worked in Butte County, so much disdain, little 100-foot fuel breaks, and that kind of fire behavior didn't really have impact, though there was some positive to it. You've seen this one already, so I'll blow by it. Okay, here's the part that helped me help people who have homes understand this whole fire thing. And I used to be controversial and start out and say wood doesn't burn. I'm here from the university to tell you wood doesn't burn. And that would get people to wrap their head around it. And the fire science guys, they'd go, oh God, animal scientists. But the point being is you got to understand, I had a physicist from the university saying, oh, this is just thermal transfer, and I've got all the equations for it. So once you understand that the wood fiber itself does not combust, it has to be preheated, gives off a volatile gas, and that's what actually combusts. So what you understand then is that we're talking about how heat moves across the landscape. And it's important that you understand that, because that's the whole concept of preventing fires. And so with that, you see these typical stuff that you see firefighters go through in fire behavior. So first you understand the triangle, oxygen, heat, and fuel. So the fuel has to be heated. In presence of oxygen, you get combustion. Now what happens is heat normally rises. Now you take the one on the landscape, we add wind that gives us a more horizontal transfer of fuel, of heat, across the fuel base, and you get more efficient burn. It moves faster. You put terrain in there, instead of heat's going up straight, and you put it on a steep slope, guess what? It's preheating things as it goes. It speeds up the fire. So when we're talking about which one burns first, which one of them? Well, that one on the bottom is going to take a lot of heat before it starts putting off gas. So it's the fine fuels that go up first, and that's what livestock get involved in. So when you look at what we're looking at when we're grazing or anything, is looking at horizontal continuity of fuels and vertical continuity of fuels, and that's what you start to have to understand to impact the fire intensity. And here's a simple piece of that we put in one publication talking to homeowners, is that's the ladder fuels. In other words, if we break up the distance, air is our buddy in fuels, in fuel management. We want more air in between each combustible source, be it your house or be it a tree. So we're trying to space that, and of course, here's your perfect continuum of fuel, both horizontally and vertically. So the concept here is mainly, and you've heard a lot of this, is to remove plant material by using grazing. Second is the hoof action. Sheila talked about that. And then the other thing that I looked at is in brush systems, there is the ability over time to actually lower the brush by depleting the root carbohydrates. Plant's just a solar antenna. If you take the leaves off continually, that brush species has to keep pulling out from its root reserves. Eventually, it runs out and dies. Now, that takes a whole different grazing system involvement. So when Fire Safe Councils, we were dealing, my fat finger, we were dealing with fuel breaks, and 100 to 300 feet wide, placed on the ridge. Now you understand, if you understand that whole heat transfer deal, we put them on a ridge where it flattens out, so you don't have topography like this. You change fire behavior by putting it on a ridge or near roads. The other one, and I think after the campfire, I'm more of a believer in landscapes. We really do need, under this new fire regime that we're seeing, we need to think in wider areas than fuel breaks. We're getting some of those moderate fire behavioral conditions where fuel breaks are effective. They are burn back spots, and they can be used by firefighters. But I'm really starting to think we need to think on a wider scale if we're going to have 40, 50 mile-an-hour winds in that behavior. We're trying to get, the firefighters tell us in their modeling, they're trying to get a 4-foot flame length or lower. That allows them to use all firefighting potentials. This is a fire management officer, took me out here and said, we're ready for the goats. There are some places animals don't belong, and that's one of them. But animals are a good thing. I think we're missing a bet. Where we should be looking at animals is after the campfire. You've now opened up an area that but we're going to worry about where the next big fire is. No, we had a plan, an integrated approach following a fire should be to bring in animals. And of course, the green alternative animals provide is they're better than herbicides or burning as an option. Now, here's the thing that I'm going to start off with. Cows over on the one side, looking at cattle generally eat grass, and goats and sheep eat brush, browse, and forbs. Yeah, that's kind of general. I can find you cattle that will eat brush, but this is the general concept, and that's a paper that was published. I will say a lot of stuff I'm going to present to you is 2007, woefully old. And I would challenge the scientific community and my colleagues, this needs to be updated. This is relevant and needs to be updated. Now, Sheila talked about a lot of things. I liken that most people think grazing is like a light switch. It's either on or it's off. I hope you got from Sheila's the complexity, the outcome you want is based on the management you use. It isn't light switch. Grazing can be both. It can be good and it can be bad. It's the management that determines the outcome and whether it's good or bad. Now, animals are amazing critters. We've lost our ability to get biofeedback. We'll eat ice cream until we're a little sick. They're able, amazingly, and a lot of the work from Utah State is just blowing my mind. Animals have sensory perceptions and they optimize what they eat. And that kind of drives us back to what we want as outcomes. And there's two things. They're eating for nutrition and they're sensing secondary compounds. Every plant has something in there to keep things from eating it. And those are called secondary compounds. Some of them are highly deleterious, and we'll talk about that. So again, Sheila talked about intensity, frequency, and duration. So you get the idea of when there is a lot of variation in how you graze. It's not a light switch. And previous experience, you can get cattle that have been used to grazing brush, and they will defy that first graphic I showed you. So that's very important. And the Israelis, when they were here, most of the time they spent their time shaking heads at our animal grazing and fire thing because they're way miles ahead of us. And they use multi-species in much of their fire work, where they're using goats, sheep, and cattle as a combination, and varying with mouth size and hoof action and those types of things. Now here's something I'll tell you that you can flip things on its head. This bit of research, albeit old, it still tells you when sheep were lightly stocked, they ate a lot of grass. As soon as you did what Sheila said and you give them a little competition, it's like you going to a wedding with your tight neighbors and you know they didn't bring enough food. You get in the line first. Well, the whole thing happens here too. Look at these sheep. They went over and started browsing when there was 55. Holy crap, I'm out of food and that one's gonna get it. I'm eating it. So you can change what animals, that whole biofeedback thing, by taking competition to the next level. Nutritionists, since I'm an animal scientist and a nutritionist, I gotta throw up that we manage protein, energy, and ruminants, they just are a big vat. And they produce volatile fatty acids that are the energy source and minerals. So whenever you're grazing, you're trying to manage those three indices to maximize production, or at least keep the animals alive, one of the two. Here's secondary compounds. And I told you plants have things to keep other things from eating. The lead one is tannins that we see here in California. We'll talk about that. There's a whole group of others. They vary seasonally and yearly. This is my colleague in Nevada started this way back when. Only ewes can prevent wildfire. And Ed was great at he was Mr. Marketing in the university. It got on Paul Harvey. He got, so anyhow, you can see that's in Carson City. You can see the Capitol Dome there. The waterfall fire there got their attention. And these are homes that are right against the urban interface, and they brought sheep in. So you can see over time, first prior to grazing, then grazing, that after that grazing, they brought in dry ewes and did that. And then you can see the effects the following season of that grazing event. And these dry ewes ate everything, different from the ones you saw there with the lambs. We'll get into that story a little bit different. So you can see the impact of that grazing. Pretty heavy grazing, I will note. But again, this was to achieve a fire objective, not something else. Lee will recognize that. This is just going through some of the ecosystems. This is actually work in a pine forest. We're trying to do silviculture activity. This commercial forest company was interested in trying to use goats and browsers as a way of alternative to herbicide use. And you can see a very effective control. Prior to this treatment, there was a study done on their ground where they put 7 goats per acre for 3 weeks. And this was published data in the summer. They estimated they got about 15 to 25% removal of vegetation. And this is our empathy. I must say, in '99, we were doing a lot of learning the hard way, which was basically starve the goats and they'll finally eat everything, which wasn't a very good profit model. Depending on the plant species present and the length of stay, we could get various utilization. And they estimated the cost about $60, $70, and $99 for that. And the company looked at, well, we can use herbicides for 60 to 100, and we get 75 to 90%. So it's still in its infancy, had some problems. Now this is the protein value of most brush, and I think I will say that grass grazing and that is a very simple science, and I think I'll show you a little bit about, there's only one indice we have to manage there. Here we're looking at 8, 9% protein, which isn't really good in nutritional status of these brush species we're trying to control for fire. So we have a challenge that we're not providing the animals with great forage. generally better in the spring than it is in the fall. So if you're trying to bring in a goat grazer or some sheep grazer in the fall, you better bring some money because they need to supplement with protein for those animals to function.
Just so you know, as another nutritionist, 8% crude protein in the diet is the bare minimum the ruminant needs to function.
Good point. Now, these are the tannin contents. We had a PhD thesis that was done, and she looked at it in both our Hopland Research Station and Sierra. She did a wonderful job of outlining seasonal variations. You can see the amounts and variation depends on the plant species, but we have some very high tannins, and the tannins actually block the protein absorption by animals. And so you're making it tougher for that animal to survive. They certainly know it and will back off of those. Research has shown that if you mix the forage of brush, or that they'll actually do better than when they're on maybe 1 or 2 tannin-containing species. So here's some chaparral, and here's some research that was done. 400 goats in July utilized 90% of the leaves and the twigs of the smaller diameter, and again, that's the fine fuels that the fire behaviorists will tell are important. The scrub oat, they ate 80%, and the chamise, manzanita, which is really high generally in tannins, and buckwheat were low, and they were only taken under duress. So that animal's telling you, I got a secondary compound, I ain't eating this unless you starve me. Then they said the holding pens, we got pretty good use. Well, they had no options all night. They were in there and there was nothing else to eat. So they cleaned it up. But again, this is getting after that whole thing of there's secondary compounds that we as scientists and people as producers need to address if we're going to go after certain brush species that dominate California's system. Here's one where they used 200 goats, Spanish goats. They reduced the understory by 82% in that grazing system. And the 1 and 2 hour fuels, which fire behaviorists will look at as an important thing for rate of spread of the fire, is 58%. It's pretty good utilization. I will again stress that I wish there was more studies. There's more anecdotal. I did this and this is what we got. We need more sound science for this to move forward. We really do need more data to be developed. This is one other study where goats reduced the brush 45 to 15% in 1 year on a landscape. And it took sheep 3 years in that study to get the same results. Now you'll notice here that when they used goats following sheep, they actually got an improvement. So again, as the Israelis would tell us, multi-species is another thing we need to be researching and looking at, just not one. Here's another interesting, 5 years of goat grazing on this thing reduced it down to 2%. So it does show with proper timing, you can actually change brush and get a fire component down to just grass and change it. Here's valley grasslands, a little more straightforward. This gets to the point Mark said, a little hard to see the lines here, but I use cow-calf proteins. This is protein of grass, because I'll get fire people who'll say, I need the goats or I need the cows in there in July. Well, again, bring some money because they need to supply protein to make that animal function in that dry system. And that's what this basically says. As grass dries down, which its protein content goes down.
Yeah, so to add in another nutritional observation, grass, when it's green, commonly has 12 to 18% protein in it. When it's dry, it can be anywhere between 3 and 6% protein. So when you eat it, it makes a big difference to the animal.
So as a fire practitioner, fire management officers, they don't understand that. So that's a key point that we need to somehow get across. Here's my other thing. In Carson City, they paid for their grazing at first and they had objectives. Just couldn't help themselves. I'll do it for free. Just give me free grazing. Okay, well, when it went to free grazing, then the objective was animal performance, not fire prevention. So I'll stress to you, that's a real, if you want to actually change sometimes you're gonna have to pay. I agree, we're not gonna pay cattlemen to graze their rangeland, but if you're a city and you want specific things, you need to pay because it's gonna take time, management, and those types of things to reach your objectives. Here's the big thing, we need to think in a bigger sense of a fire shed and how we graze, because we're just blowing it through the roof with transportation costs. We had one where the goats cost us $500 an acre to use, and everybody was complaining about it. You know what? We made that goat person move out, brought him back in a month later to graze another little 30-acre piece. Why didn't we have a plan to move through that whole thing? People keep telling me, well, put them in a closet. We need them in a month. We can't put them in a closet. So we need to think about providing forage in the area to make this thing a sustainable unit, not just bring them in, bring them out. I know that's a little more difficult than I'm saying it, but we need to get that across to the fire people. They're not, it just doesn't work. We did work with fire scientists who said, here's what you need to have for objectives if you're going to evaluate grazing pre and post. So there's a back to that. Changing changes in 1 hour fuels changes the rate of the fire spreads. It's an important key in fire behavior. So grazing can have a thing, but I want to say, again, you've heard it over and over, but we'll say it again. It's a dynamic tool. What you put into it, how you do it is what you'll get out of it. I think the future focus needs to be secondary compounds if we're truly going to address this. The University of California had the potential to hire a specialist that would work in that area. We didn't have the funding. Utah State's way ahead. I suggest it's in the best interest for California to work with Utah State that's working on secondary compounds. I know I'm speaking to the scientific community, but it does affect producers and it does affect our ability to change brush forest fuels. And I also say, look to Israel. They're light years ahead of us. They're a little closer to the edge because living in Israel is a day-to-day proposition, as they told me, and they take it seriously as they graze around their bases to protect them against fire as one of the tools coming in. So I think that's a key focus. So with that, thank you, Mark. Good to be with all of you. Best of luck.
All right, so let's get on with the panel. So here we go. So the panel, we're going to have Tim Copeman, and following Tim, we're going to have Todd Landis come up, Rich Shortfall, and then we'll bring everybody up at the end to have Glenn, Billy, Andre. Actually, why don't you guys just come on up to the front, folks, as I call you out. So Glenn, Tim, Todd, Rich, Billy, and Andre, let's go up and join up at the table. And so Tim and then Todd and Rich, I'd like you guys to come up and give a brief introduction about yourself and what your experience is. And then I'd like to move it to the panel discussion. So if you guys can come up and maybe within 6 to 8 minutes, not much longer, kind of explain your background, your experience with this. And then we'll go to questions from the audience and discussion. Okay, then we'll do that. So let's get Tim's slides up. Awesome.
I'm as bad as Nader on this thing, huh?
Watch your big fat thumbs.
There we go.
All right, I'll try to go through these fairly briefly. My name is Tim Copeland. I'm gonna try and give a rancher's perspective, if I may, on not only the benefits of using grazing as a management tool for fire fuel loading, but I want to make sure that agency folks, environmental folks, folks that may have a concern about and not like grazing, can understand that there are many, many benefits to grazing in the appropriate place, at the appropriate time, with the appropriate livestock. So I'm going to be here from a rancher's perspective saying grazing is good. We can not only use it for fire suppression, but we can use it for a lot of other things to improve things. So,
before you take off, could you please use the, I know you've got the pipes to do this, but the folks who are on the web need to hear you.
Okay, let's move on here. First of all, I want to establish a little bit of credibility, I guess. Every time I go to a government office, I have to establish credibility because I'm basically viewed as uncredible. I'm not enjoying this piece of equipment. Matter of fact, I think it was made in China.
You point your finger at me and I'll change the slide.
I need to go backwards. I know I hate to go back.
That's all right, we're going backwards. You tell me when to stop.
All right, establishing credibility. That's me, that's Tater. Move on. I managed, thankfully, I was able to manage a 40,000 acre watershed for a number of years, 25 years to be exact. And we got to see a variety of things that went on this 40,000 acre watershed. Primary purpose of the watershed was to provide a drinking water source for a population in a city. So primary, our job was source quality. And so we had to watch our P's and Q's. We had a grazing program. We almost lost a grazing program, but we were able to stay with it. And so that's my experience there, not my own personal ranching. Moving. Little bit about cattle QuickBooks. I just threw this in there because a lot of people mistakenly think that ranchers are all rich. How many people think ranchers are all rich? Hudson, you can head back to work. I just want to throw this out to basically go through a little 100 cow outfit and with a standard set of statistics, 93% wean calf crop, acreage of 12 animal units per year, 12 acres per animal unit year round. Pasture costs at $22 an AUM. Anyway, moving on, retain 10 replacement heifers. Bottom line, expenses total $60,450. And this is for 100 head of cows. And income, boom. Income, those are prices that fit today's market, as bad as it is. This is about exactly where you're going to be on a little 100 head of cows. Gross income of $70,264. Your expenses you saw at $60,450. Net income of $9,814 net. Now, if you're putting kids through college and trying to keep food on the table, this little 100 head cow herd is not doing your job. And it also doesn't mean you've got a whole lot of money to spend on fire suppression and weed control and habitat prevention or habitat management. Okay, that was a little quick post. Ranchers aren't all rich. And this has mostly been gone over today, and a lot of the stuff is going to be repetitious. This is just my definition of California rangelands and acreages and things like that. That's been well covered today by other speakers. California beef production has been somewhat covered as well. Cattle provide about $3.3 billion to the state economy annually. We produce and raise almost 5 million cattle annually in the state of California. Moving on. We're going to get through these. CRCC, the resolution was already mentioned today. Moving on. Fire statistics have been mentioned specifically today many, many times and probably will be mentioned many more times. The numbers I pulled together, 2017 in California, over 7,000 fires, 500,000 acres. 2016, 4,700, 244,000. You can see a hell of a jump between 16 and 17. 18 numbers are going to be even worse. Combined CAL FIRE U.S. Forest Service, 9,000 fires, 1,000,002 acres. So that's local statistic or state statistics. Moving on. Fuel hazard reduction has been talked about quite a bit. Annual grasslands typically produce forage or biomass from 500 to 4,000 pounds per acre, depending upon soil class, topography, slope, and exposure. UCCE recommendation for residual dry matter is to leave 1,000 to 1,200 pounds. Sheila spent a little time talking about residual dry matter. Once again, That is the biomass left following the grazing season prior to the new germinating fall rains.
If I may add, that range from 500 to 1,200, thing where we're on the coast, is what you have versus inland.
Yes. Absolutely. And once again, slope, topography, soil class and type, etc. Unmanaged annual grasslands will accumulate thatch each year as the biodegradable deterioration slows down. Just a quick aside, Mount Diablo State Park, a friend of mine who is a registered professional forester has been doing RDM evaluations at Mount Diablo State Park. We wish to leave 500 to 1,200 pounds per acre. When he is doing the RDM evaluations on the state park ground, he has an accumulated RDM of 26,000 pounds per acre. Now, you want to talk about adding to a fuel length, you want to talk about heat, slowing the fire down. That's the kind of a fire that is going to take oak trees out because the flame length is going to be huge. So RDM is important, cumulative thatch, large factor in relative temperature, spread, flame length, etc. Moving on. Fire fuel hazard reduction, RDM measurements. Again, here's an ungrazed site. And not only do you have an excessive amount of vegetation, but you've got some really foul, noxious, invasive weeds as well. Fire fuel reduction, managed grasslands do reduce fire temperature, speed, travel, and flame. I'm just going over a lot of stuff that's already been gone over, but it's a rancher's perspective again. Unmanaged range sites, the impact of native plants and soil structure may be ecologically devastating. This has also been covered today, but I want to share this site with you. On the green side that looks so nice and green for the summer is Baccharis pugularis, one of my favorite native plants. Coyote brush. And that's an ungrazed site for 25 years. Next to it is an open grassland. And you can see what happens in the absence of grazing. After 25 years, you basically got a monoculture of a plant that I consider very undesirable and certainly a heavy fuel load plant. So there's the woody conversion that has been talked about earlier today. Understory management has been talked about a lot, and I'll move on from there. Grazing on fire sites. One of the things that I ran into when I had some involvement in the rim fire was the U.S. Forest Service obviously lost a lot of land, a lot of tree resources, etc. And one of the things that they first proposed to some of our ranching friends that had allotments on the rim fire was that they were not going to allow cattle back onto the rim fire site for 2 years because the BLM believed, and the BLM had a policy that no grazing prior to 2 years. My question that came up there is, I was on the site many times, and one of the things that I noticed is that we probably had some hydrophobic soils. We were going to have new brush growth the first season. What's the best thing you can do to break up the soils and to suppress the new brush growth? To me, that would be to reintroduce some grazing to the site, and they eventually got to do that, but it took a lot of arguing and a lot of discussion. So what is being managed in the forest lands if they make decisions like that? They finally came around to the right thought process, but it took a little science brought to the table. Okay. Critical I-zone areas. Now, I've been using I-zone for years now. I hear it's wooey. I still go I-zone, interface zone. I had never heard of wooey before. So my grandkids say it once in a while. Critical I-zone areas or wooey zones. It really doesn't sound good. I go downtown to the wooey zone. Anyway, typical I-zone areas in California got to be managed through target grazing, restricted. Anyway, this is all stuff that's been talked about. So I don't want to keep hashing things out. Gee, have we ever heard about the Carson City issue? Glenn? Okay, Glenn covered the Carson City Ranger District use of sheep grazing, and it was something that I'd thrown in here as well. Got some friends there that have been involved in that, so we'll move on from that. Now, one of the things that we need to talk about when we talk about using grazing as a management tool is certainly the impact that grazing has that is advantageous to a lot of resources, the habitat management, habitat enhancement, and all the things that go along with that. So also talked about earlier with Stuart Weiss. This is a picture of Stuart Weiss and his butterfly. So we've talked about the nitrogen loading. Sheila covered that to a great extent. So this is Stuart Weiss and his butterfly, where he requires grazing on some parkland over in the San Jose area. And it's been a successful trip. Okay. We've already talked about vernal pools. We've already talked about Thule elk, and that is Henry Miller, the rancher who basically took 28 Thule elk, and he was a rancher. I want to make that perfectly clear. He was a rancher that preserved the Thule elk to the population of 6,000 we've got now. Wildlife habitat enhancement. This happens to be my own personal breeding pond for California tiger salamander. And it is, it tested positive this year. We got the little buggers. Moving on, there he is. Most people have heard me say this before, but my family has been on this ranch since 1918, and probably one of the most onerous things we've ever had to go through was a battle over federal inheritance taxes. And that little guy right there is the most lucrative livestock I've ever raised. And through having habitat for this little guy, we were able to pay off a very sizable amount of federal inheritance tax and keep the ranch and the family and debt-free at this point. Okay. Enhancement of plant diversity. On the north end of the ranch, I've got this little guy. It's a Calipe silver spot butterfly. We used him also to help to pay the inheritance tax bill. One of the things I want to talk about, a little bit about plant diversity. I know I'm probably running over time, but the advantages and benefits of grazing cannot be emphasized enough, not just for biofuel loading, but for a lot of other good stuff. This is a picture of Bear Valley, and Bear Valley, Colusa, Glenn County, Colusa County mostly, and very beautiful valley, very productive ranching operation. And it was purchased by an investment group. The investment group decided that one of the worst things that could be done on a ranch was to have cattle grazing. So they stopped cattle grazing, and the wildflowers that Bear Valley is famous for, people come from all over the world to view this wildflower deal. They had no wildflowers. The neighboring ranch, Jimmy Keegan's ranch, and he was doing tours and charging people to come and look at his wildflowers. He had a hell of a year that year because there were no wildflowers in Bear Valley. And there it is on the bottom side once they restored grazing. One of the things that was mentioned that ranchers will participate in grazing management by doing infrastructure improvements and providing water sources. This is a water supply source that we've developed using solar power, and I'm a big advocate and fan of solar power now for pumping water. Once again, part of the system with an 8,000 gallon storage tank on top of a ridge. You pump to the ridge, and then you can go just about anywhere you want with a water line. Another same situation there. Once again, best management practices applied. You get the cattle to go where you want by controlling what their water use or water source is. And if you don't want them going someplace, but you've got a trough there, turn the valve or pipe and float. They'll go where there is water. The other thing is attractants such as salt and protein supplements, new corrals, et cetera, all good things you could do on these properties. Land matter benefits of managed grazing, fine fire, fuel load management, reduction of woody vegetation conversion, control of noxious invasive plant species, and grazing revenue generation. Once again, they were duly out. And yeah, I got down in the dirt and played with the tiger salamanders with our biologists and learned a little bit. Things are a little different now. The end. That's it from soup to nuts.
All right. So Todd, Rich, do you guys want to give a background introduction to yourselves, and then we'll proceed with panel discussion?
They've got slides too.
Okay, slides up, please.
Make them quick.
I promise. So whoever's got the smallest fingers, that'll work.
My name's Todd Lando. I'm the executive coordinator at Fire Safe Marin, which is Marin County's Fire Safe Council. I'm a 30-year firefighter, a forester, and a wildfire hazard mitigation consultant as well. We're going to talk real quick, 5 minutes or less, about a project, the reason we're going to be on the panel, and I really want to get you a chance to ask everybody questions. Marin County, if there are any fire people in here, are kind of known as one of the 2 asbestos counties in California. Burn relatively infrequently, especially today, but with a significant history of wildfires. This is an illustration. This is a fire in 1923. The 96-year anniversary is tomorrow of the largest fire we know of in Marin's history. Everything we're going to talk about is related especially to this project. The grazing that we've been doing, our programs in Marin are designed to sit dead center in the middle of this significant fire in 1923, and are designed to interrupt that from happening again when it does happen again. Rich Shortall, I'll let him introduce himself in a second. Rich is the president of Fire Safe and also the president of Sleepy Hollow Fire Protection District's board of directors. In 2016, we worked together to write a report and assessment of the WUI risk in Sleepy Hollow, which is a 1,600-acre community of about 1,000 people in central Marin, right in the middle of the path of that 1923 fire. We looked at the risk to infrastructure, to homes, to residents, and look for ways that we could mitigate the risk and the hazards in the future. Grazing is only mentioned in one paragraph as a potential tool to help us enact the recommendations in this report. It turned out to be a really important paragraph in the report. We used vegetation fuel modeling that had been created at one of the finest resolutions, I think, that had been done to date in California for our community wildfire protection plan. We applied that fuel modeling, which was current in 2016, to run wildfire models to look at potential rate of spread, heat and flame lengths, other potential fire impacts in the community. And then real specifically, we used RMAC fire modeling to look at potential fuel treatments. And one of the ones that we identified, I think the whole reason we're here today, was the potential to apply a fuel break. We ran multiple models to look at the impacts that different widths of fuel breaks would work. The real goal was to return fuel conditions more to what they looked like, ironically, in 1923, when that entire area, this entire community, was grazed extensively. It no longer is. Backers is a significant problem. Loss of our grasslands turned out to be a significant problem. So our goals are to restore that, to reduce the light fuels annually each year. Our goals, in order to do that, our treatments needed to either be fleets of teenagers with weed eaters, like lots and lots of lawnmowers, or other tools. Ultimately, what we identified was grazing. The historic use of this land was probably our best objective, or our best tactic to reduce the vegetation, create these fuel breaks where they had existed historically. Let Rich talk next.
Hi, everybody. Rich Shortall. I'm actually a retired deputy chief, San Francisco Fire Department. 30 years of firefighting, probably 1,000 plus fires, never went to a wildfire. And yet that's kind of what I deal with all the time right now. So as Todd points out, great assessment done. We're in Marin County. This is like the home of environmentalism. And the theory there, and understandably, it's always been if you don't do anything, that means the landscape is in a natural state and this is the way it should be. But as you've heard today, we've had wildfires that passed through for a zillion years. We've had all kinds of wild animals grazing and whatnot. And frankly, the fire load, the fuel load in Marin County does not look at all like it used to as a natural thing. It's heavily overgrown everywhere. And yet there's some natural resistance to changing all that. So this is really a story of cooperation. It's a little hard to tell from this map. Oops, back up just for 1 second. A little hard to tell from the map. You'll see these yellow lines here. Those really represent ridge tops, and we're kind of, Sleepy Hollow's right in the middle of that, sort of a box canyon. As Todd said, you know, a couple thousand people live in there, 850 homes. But we're surrounded, as you look on what would be, as you look at that on the right side, that's the town of Terra Linda, San Rafael. To the north is more of Terra Linda, Fairfax, San Anselmo, others. So there's a lot of people. And if you want to do grazing or make something happen in a suburban area like this with a lot of people around, it's really all about cooperation. So again, this is a story of cooperation. Within that area in there, what you can see is there are probably 3 or 4 big landholders. One of them is the Marin County Open Space District, has a whole ridge top over there. There's the San Domenico School, which is 500 of our 600 acres, so 1,600 acres there. It's a big place that has not been touched since it was a dairy 75 years ago. There's another big ranch called the Triple C Ranch, and very importantly, one called the Rocking H, which is actually owned by James Hetfield from Metallica. Luckily, when Todd came in with this idea, we thought we were interested in grazing. The manager, Arlo Sieber, had already been working with Andre from Star Creek over there and bringing in goats as a first pass on that ranch over there. They're gradually restoring that ranch to what the land used to look like a long time ago. And he's doing it with goats, doing it with sheep, doing it with cows and so forth. So he said, hey, we all ought to get together and do some grazing with the goats. Star Creek is good, which we think they've been fantastic. So we got together. So we had 5 partners in this. Our fire district, which owns no land but has some money, Marin County Open Space, the 2 big ranch holders, and then the San Domenico School. And we have different relationships financially with them, but basically everybody chipped in towards a start-off program to see how this would go. So we brought in Star Creek. First year we had 2 herds of 400 each of goats, and they did a really good job of grazing the ridge tops in there. We were really happy with how it went. It was a fantastic experience, but it was the first experience, first year of that. When we were doing that, and this is sort of the benefit of being environmental forest, there's a lot of people around. And a lot of people walking up there, what's with all the goats? Everybody falls in love with the goats. Everybody thinks the goats are great. All of a sudden, we're getting this fantastic PR that goats are the best thing we ever did here, and all of the environmental concerns don't do anything, kind of fell away. People started getting interested in all. The next thing that happened is our surrounding communities started getting interested in this because people were saying, well, we got the goats in Sleepy Hollow, how come we don't have goats over here? So second year into this, let's go back just a little bit. I'll just show you the list. So first year, it was Sleepy Hollow Fire District, Open Space, Ross Valley Fire Department helped, Fire Safe Marin, San Domenico School, but now we've added the town of San Anselmo, the town of Ross, the town of Fairfax, the Ross Valley School District, which greatly expanded their program this year because everybody saw what we were doing. And it was really the public seeing the goats out there, tax dollars at work, improving the landscape, which really generate the politicians to start putting a few bucks towards this thing. So I'll let Todd talk more about how it actually physically happened. But again, if you want to do these kind of environments, you got to pull people together. Once it starts happening, people are going to love the results of it. They see the results, they see tax dollars at work, and of course, they all love goats.
Yeah, so just real quick, the statistics, we focused on areas that had been identified in Marin's Community Wildfire Protection Plan, in Sleepy Hollow's WUI assessment. We're conducting the grazing immediately adjacent to homes within the defensible space zone where the grazing will potentially have the most impact on protecting structures. We're also grazing ridge lines in places where there are strategic values for fire suppression, for us to be able to either commit firefighting resources, create fuel breaks, reduce the intensity of wildfires so firefighters can work. And also to restore grasslands so that in the long run, we can maintain grasslands, which although they contribute to faster rates of spread in wildfires, it also presents fuels that are easier for us to fight fires in. Just a couple images of our goats. This is an example. We get questions from the fire community. Sometimes this is a mid-slope grazing along a fire road. This is a critical access road for fire suppression, and it's in an area where we expect the wildfire under the prevailing conditions or even the 97th percentile conditions to be a backing fire, backing into the community. A mid-slope fuel break like this has the potential to impact that, to allow us to catch this fire mid-slope before it reaches the community. It's the only place that we're not grazing on a ridge top. You can see the area. This is about typical of what we've done, about a 200-foot wide reduced fuel zone with the goats and sheep. Real quick, we've got some images that show us visibly. We use these to show the public, the community, the changes in fuel over time as it's grazed. The bottom of the image hasn't been grazed. The middle section's been grazed for about 12 hours, and the top section for 24 hours. Just a nice visual. And Rich mentioned probably the biggest thing we've gotten out of this is community support, tremendous support. And if you happen to text GOAT to 77453, you can donate. This is done all in conjunction with homeowners being encouraged through increased inspections and enforcement by the fire department to create their defensible space. And through work by fire crews to reduce heavy fuels that the goats can't impact. So that, right now, after the goats have left for the season, we've moved in with fire crews, forest mulchers to reduce heavier vegetation, to try to restore a landscape where the grazing will be even more effective in years to come. That's it. I'll have to sit down and answer your questions.
So I appreciate everyone's patience waiting so long for questions, but now I think it's time for us to get to work. So now I'd like you guys to pepper the panel with whatever questions you've been sitting on for the majority of the day. There are, I know, some individuals out in the audience who also have some experience very similar to those up here, so I welcome anybody's contributions to the conversations as these develop. One person I want to point out is Marie Ha from Sonoma County. So she's been interested in trying to organize some grazers locally to try and do some fuel treatments there. I have heard from many, probably a dozen or more different communities around the state who contacted me because of my role with RMAC and others who have an interest in somehow getting a local project going where we can begin doing fuel treatments. And so anyway, throw in. But for now, I've got the mic. Lance and I will pass the mic around. So if you have a question, we'll get it out to you. So it looks like Denise had her hand up first. So I'll give it to Denise, and then Lance will get it over to you. So we will carry it around. So let's give these guys something to chew on.
Well, in that targeted, Denise DeFries, retired land manager from East Bay Regional Park District, and we use a lot of fuel break goat grazing. And I was interested at one time to bring it into a brand new area that hadn't had grazing in probably 60 years, and I was told I was going to need an EIR. So I'm curious what you guys did in Marin in terms of permitting, how you were able to implement that.
On public lands, we're operating under the EIR. It was the CEQA process that was developed by the Marin County Parks and Open Space as part of their vegetation management and biodiversity plan. So grazing was reviewed, and they submitted all of the CEQA for this. Luckily, I had a partner that did that.
I have a question over here. Matthew Shapiro, I'm a livestock advisor for Cooperative Extension down at Ventura, Santa Barbara County. I'll be speaking in a few moments, but I was struck by something you said about how the goal seemingly of the project in Marin was to return fuel loading to the 1923 level, which is when you had this really catastrophic fire. And so I'm curious, how is it going to be different than 1923, even if you can achieve the fuel reduction from the project that you're describing?
I think there are a couple things. One, the conditions right now, the types of fuels we see right now present a much bigger control challenge than the fuels that would have been present in 1923 when that was mostly grassland. I think one of the big differences right now is that fire suppression has changed dramatically. Our capabilities in fire suppression have changed dramatically since 1923. We're trying to return conditions where today's firefighting, fire suppression forces can potentially work. Those conditions have been lost since 1923, really since the grazing ended. Most of these areas were grazed up until probably the mid to late 1970s. That's about when the grazing ended in these areas. So we're looking at 25 to 40 years or so of land that hasn't been grazed. I think the other impact is that there is an immediate impact, a difference. We're putting these fuel breaks strategically. There's certainly an impact as soon as the goats leave on the ground, there's virtually no vegetation, no fine fuels to carry a fire at a 200-foot fuel break along these ridges. So although that whole area may have been grazed, in 1923, they were not doing targeted grazing down to, in some cases, significantly reducing the fine fuels along ridge lines. So a little different than what it looked like, but we do want to reduce the influx of Baccharis, Douglas fir, and others that are taking the other. So.
Next.
Okay. All right, so to keep it rolling along then. Okay, Lynn.
Okay, so Glenn, you mentioned that we have the. I can speak loud bit. Oh, the online. Hello, online folks. So I'm Lynn Hunsinger. Glenn, I thought it's a pet peeve of mine, or something that I'm very concerned about. You brought up, and I really appreciate it when you mentioned the rim fire not allowing grazing back for 2 years, because I did my own research many years ago, and it really is helpful if grazing comes back on as soon as possible, because a lot of very small plants will be consumed when they're very young. And I am very concerned about all these. I think we have hundreds of thousands of freshly burned acres in California. It's the most economical opportunity we will have to rebuild a more fire-resistant forest. And it seems like nothing's happening in a larger sense. And I'm wondering if any of you can comment on why the efforts to create a more fire-resistant landscape on these places that have burned usually several times before and will burn several times again, including where the campfire is. What are the barriers there?
Well, I think with a lot of these, they're overwhelmed at this point. If you look at the campfire, I mean, they're just trying to get communities back. And when you introduce this level of think in the future, they're just trying to get back to where they rebuild paradise. I think, and I didn't ask, but it'd be good if anybody from CAL FIRE, the latest, if somebody asked about environmental coverage for grazing, and I don't know if it was clear in the last version of their planning effort, whether they included grazing in that document, CEQA document. Yes? Okay, good, because that will be an important thing. Well, there are research efforts right now in the Intermountain area to look at different strategies post-fire. And so several cooperative extension people are looking at post-fire, and it's mainly in that perennial system, introducing grazing after seed set. So, and again, it's not a light switch on or off, it's letting the plant go through its full thing, and then put animals in to plant more seeds when the plant won't be damaged by some level of grazing, because that's the major thing. They're concerned that these young seedling perennials are going to be hurt in that system, in the Intermountain system. So it's not, again, not if we graze, it's when we graze, how we graze, that research is hopefully going to point out.
If I can kind of address that rim fire issue as well. Glenn's right. I know that there is some research going on right now through the Cooperative Extension Service to counteract BLM policy, and BLM has got that written and cast in stone. U.S. Forest Service has not got it cast in stone as policy. The other thing that I did mention is there were hydrophobic soils due to the intensity and the heat of that fire, and cow hoof action on that hydrophobic soil certainly would have been advantageous. Glenn mentioned the fact that, you know, there was a fire there in what, 5 years ago, 4 years ago at Ring Fire, but there had also been previous fires there, and there will be more fires there, because one of the things that the U.S. Forest Service did not do was salvage logging. And every one of those log decks that's left there is just dry fuel for the next fire that comes through, and I just think it's absolutely wrong that was done that way. In the middle of the Rim Fire was a 15,000 acre site, Sierra Pacific Industries. Sierra Pacific Industries went in, salvage log, opened up their Sonora mill just for the salvage logs, cleaned the property up, and got it going back the way it should be. And as you looked at the fire sites, you could tell where SBI's ground was, where the Forest Service ground was, because of the management that went along with it. The understory was not there on SBI's ground. The intensity of the fire was much less.
Andre, you got something you wanted to add?
Tim covered it, it was the 2 year.
Let me put this in real quick. Lance, so one of the RMAC's in-house projects has been to develop bibliographies of all the research literature on particular rangeland management issues that have to do with California. One of the ones that we were working on recently had to do with the quote unquote 2 year rule that had been with the Forest. Would you mind just, you know, a really quick snippet about what you learned about that? I mean, because the Forest Service and BLM have had a sort of semi-formal or non-formal policy about that.
So I looked through all the BLM plans and the burned area emergency response plans, and it really is not set in stone for BLM or Forest Service, nor is it written that it's a regulation. But I couldn't look at it like every field office's management plan, so it's possible the field office in your area has that written into their plan. But it's just more of a dogma that people believe it's true. They believe it's a rule. No one ever actually goes and looks, but it's not a rule, so.
Yeah, and Rick, coming into you.
So, but I did have a meeting with some of the rangeland researchers from the USDA's Agricultural Research Service at the Burns Experiment Station just this last year. And I asked the guys, because they had a couple of old dogs that have been research scientists for years. And so the 2 year rule. So what science is behind that? And they told me that they had themselves done research to figure out where the rule came from. And according to them, and this is going back, this is Tony Spakar and Rick Miller. And so they said, to the best of their knowledge, it was back in the 1960s sometime, some Forest Service or BLM staff was asked to make a decision about how long, you know, when animals should be brought back after fire. And someone made a decision that, well, 2 years sounds about right. And as human beings tend to do, the decision that had no research behind it became the rule or the general policy, even though, as Lance said, there's no evidence this is actually written down anywhere. It just has become the institutional policy.
Well, I'll add my 2 cents. Sue, sorry, from the Board of Forestry. So I worked for BLM in the 70s and then for the Forest Service for many years, and finally for the Park Service, and now I'm retired, and I have 2 goats, Lynn, and I'm on the Board of Forestry. But anyway, as far as the 2 year rule, my perspective is that it was developed when there were a lot of smaller fires. And so what would happen is that if there was a grazing allotment, either on the Forest Service or BLM, there would be a small fire, and then of course the cattle would come in and intensively utilize that area. And part of what has changed is now we have these huge fires. We're still implementing this 2 year rule, and the grazing intensity is not the same because you have fewer animals spread out over a much larger area. And so I think it's just, it's a function of the change in the fire regime, You know, we had, like Todd said about Marin County, we didn't have a lot of fires for a really long time. But it's a function of the, you know, the temporary change in the fire regime where there were a lot fewer fires and at one time, we were able to keep them smaller. But things like the Rim fire, you know, the impact of, you know, fairly few animals on an extremely large area, we just haven't caught up with what's happening out there. And, you know, as a former, maybe in present bureaucrat, I don't know, are we bureaucrats, Rich? I don't know what we are on the board, but we're not. Okay, thank you. It is really hard to change a rule that, like you said, people don't know where it came from. And I think it would be, you know, good for, and again, I don't have any influence on the federal government anymore, but it would be good to continue. And I think I saw are you from the Forest Service people? Maybe they have a good perspective on this, you know, but that's my perspective, is that we were looking at small areas where a lot of cattle concentrated and we saw some impacts.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure and positive that like everything else, the impacts and what happens varies by size of fire, things that you mentioned, by the kind of vegetation. When I think about it, because of my previous work, I think of a place that's going to be a brush field in 3 years. And that the brush, when it's small, has a high water content and more animals are willing to consume it in that first year when it first resprouts. But all in all, the point is there shouldn't be a rule. There should be some criteria and some understanding of what kind of fire, what kind of vegetation is going to come up, and what kind of animals you're going to use. There shouldn't just be 2 years, 5 years, or no years. We need to really try to understand the systems and manage accordingly.
Hi, Stephanie Larson with UC Cooperative Extension. I had a question for Todd and Scott. Rich, how's your project funded?
He writes the check.
Yeah, so this is the cooperative aspect of it. So for example, we have our fire district, which does not own any of the land that's being grazed, but has a few bucks, got together. We have a different relationship with each of the partners. So we have a certain percentage that we help out Marin County Open Space District, different arrangement with the school. And part of it for us has to do, what do we think the strategic value of the work that's being done there is to the community, which helps us to justify it. So every landowner puts in certainly the vast majority of the expense of the work, and then we kind of fill in the gaps. And then as you move away from that area, and you start moving over, for example, to the town of Fairfax. Interestingly enough, the town of Fairfax has a very hazardous area called Cascade Canyon. The people back there for the longest time have been very concerned about fires out there. Just behind that is a bunch of open space land that the town of Fairfax doesn't own. They've got so much political pressure, the town of Fairfax paid 100% of the expense of cleaning up the Marin County open space land behind town out there, making everybody happy and making everybody extra happy, because once open space saw what it looked like, they go, oh, we need to come in here with some hand crews and finish this off. So they put a substantial investment in after that. And I think this has been our experience all along with this, particularly in an area like ours, where there's a lot of eyes on things, is the more you do, the more it inspires other people to take responsibility, put money in towards these type of projects. And again, for the public, everything you see done, we're all reluctant to pay taxes, but the public views this really as, I can see my tax dollars at work, you know, paid for the goat, all the brush is gone or whatever. And there's so many other great services there, but you're not necessarily accessing them every day. So that's how we do it.
Martina Schneebelsman from the RCP of San Diego. I have a question for the ranchers in the panel and in the audience. What are the barriers for ranchers, from a rancher's perspective, to be able to engage in ranching projects on public or federal land?
Excuse me, some of the barriers that we have run into from time to time are the fact that some organizations within the environmental community, who we would call probably a little overzealous, will never accept grazing as a use on public lands because they are firmly convinced that the environment is harmed, habitats are harmed, water quality is harmed. And there are a couple of organizations, and I will name them, Western Watershed Projects and the Center for Biological Diversity, who have adamantly stated that no public land should be grazed. Most of the work that is being done by the UC Cooperative Extension Service can negate most of their fears. As you were able to observe, I have a healthy population of red-legged frogs and the little tiger salamander. And I have those in conjunction with a 100-year-old grazing program. Water quality issues have pretty well been researched, and there is very little impact on water quality attributed to cattle grazing. But these are perpetuated by these organizations. Public agencies that do have grazing are very firm in supporting it, in my opinion. We've got one lease right now that has an abundance of hikers and bikers through trails. And they like to see the cattle. And I tell you, we brought some cattle down there that were a little bit on the, well, just a little high-headed. And they became the most gentle set of cows you ever want to see because they're seeing these people all the time. So a lot of people like to see it, but there are still those perceptions from an environmental standpoint that are perpetuated by falsehoods.
I think I want to add to that just a little bit. What I saw back in 1993 was a movement that was called Cattle Free by 93. That's where I walked into this. And I was amazed because so few people understand that, at least those of us on Forest Service ground and BLM ground, that those permits that we have are tied to the private land that we have. It's, you don't go out there and go pick and choose what you want. Everything is tied together due to the location and whoever was there, I guess, originally. In our case, the Romans had been there even before the Forest Service was. So what I saw that, and I like to talk about it often, is that the feelings that people had about not having cattle on the ground at that time was more like a religion. And there was no discussing it. And I didn't get that through my mind until I came to the meadow one day up there in the mountains, and somebody had shot a cow between her eyes with her little baby calf standing right there. And then that Cattle Free by 93 told people how to gut shoot cattle so people couldn't find them. And what I keep hoping and I keep seeing because of the fire and because of good people like Tim coming out and talking so that folks can see that ranchers aren't evil folks, and we're certainly not out there trying to scour the earth. We're trying to do the very best job that we can. But if you don't like cattle grazing or you have an issue with it, we need to talk about it, and we're oh so willing to do that.
One thing I'd add to barriers is the environmental documentation required. So an agency may be interested in doing it. And I'm hopeful, the hopes were that if there was a well-written document by CAL FIRE, that local agencies could do what they call tiering off of that document and use that document as a baseline for projects. So I'm hopeful that, I'm looking for a nod again. Yeah, okay, I'm getting a nod. So yeah, that means that would be the hopes, because that is a great barrier that local agencies are afraid to move forward unless they have some assurances they've done all the appropriate environmental documents. And if there's some present document that they can reflect on and say, here's the checklist they have. There is some basis for them to move forward without spending an inordinate amount of money on just writing the document before you even treat anything on the ground.
There's some hands in the back.
Yeah, Kevin, on my way there, so Billy, if I recall, you and I had a brief conversation during one of the breaks, and you had mentioned that one of your concerns, tied back to your question, was that in some cases, well, all cases, the agencies, not because they chose to, but there are changes in laws and policies that occur with some frequency. And so one of the challenges is a ranch operator, it may take him or her some time, months to years, to kind of get themselves coordinated and organized and get the money aside to be able to do a project. And in the interim, sometimes policies change. And then also, many of these ranchers have, so the rancher has a base property that they own, but they also commonly will have grazing allotments maybe on federal ground, but they may be BLM and Forest Service. Maybe they got a little piece of state wildlife area. And each one of those different agencies they have a lease on may have different policies regarding the same things. And so this will never be fully resolved, of course, but it would be nice to, as much as possible, streamline those policies. Am I communicating the idea that you're trying to tell me? So Kevin.
So Kevin Conway, Cal Fire State Forest Program Manager. And, what's holding us up, we're exploring getting a prescribed delivery project on our state forest right now. And, the environmental documentation isn't really the scary part for us, because we, permit our timber harvesting quite frequently, and so we know a lot about our land, and this is a relatively light impact relative to timber harvesting. But is the kind of the unknown nature of, foresters and range managers aren't working together very often, in the recent past, or at least through my career. So, we're having a difficult time figuring out what we need to put in place for a successful project. And so I guess maybe I'll ask that of Andre. When you approach a new agency and start working with them as they're exploring using animals in their management, kind of what issues do you talk through with them, or, what information is kind of generally what makes them choose animals over some of the other tools that they're more familiar with, and, kind of have more predictable outcomes for us. And I, maybe preface it too, that it's, in a working forest management type setting, where I think that we've heard there's not a ton of research behind it at the moment.
So I've done one project in the forest out by Shaver, was a hazardous fuels reduction demonstration project. UC Berkeley and Con Edison or Sun Edison was part of it, and that's it's not grazing for hire type of situation. But to answer your question as best I can is, usually if I'm involved, by the time I get involved, the agency is already determined they're pretty open to grazing. So I don't really ever have to talk anybody into it. But when we do begin that relationship, from my perspective, it's easy for me to say because I'm not having to work within your or that agency's organizational framework, but don't overthink it. First of all, you're really not going to screw anything up. Set out the goals clearly in advance. Of course, you want to be careful about overgrazing and all those obvious things, but have those conversations, understand what the service provider, have a discussion. You can get a sense of the professional level and some outcomes, resources, check the background, check some references, and don't make it so arduous. Start with a small project and do it and walk away and reflect and observe, but don't overthink it or you'll never get it off the ground, is what I would say. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, another piece of that is RMAC is interested in trying, so I mentioned that there's a registered professional foresters, so that license, but also the certified range manager license. And RMAC is attempting to get those two to get together, begin having conversations about this, because Kevin, you're exactly right. We've got to get the foresters and the range management folks who are licensed professionals to begin collaborating together on these projects that we intersect. Lisa?
I would just add that the grazer would be more than happy in most cases, in my experience, to work out in advance, talk with your agency people or your foresters, the range con, whatever you need to do in advance and work out those goals. And, they're working for you, right, at that point. So as long as the goals are clear and we're not asked to do anything that's unrealistic, we have a good understanding in the beginning, I think you'll have a successful outcome.
Lisa Osterholm, I'm a member of the Rangeland Management Committee, and one of the reasons for us to put this together was to start the conversation, to work with all the leadership in the room to hopefully increase the awareness and have a better understanding of how, not just grazing, but to look at all the tools and, how we can just really improve the landscape so it's not all on fire. And, but a point that needs to be made is, because of what's happened now with all these catastrophic fires, the agencies are very committed now to reducing the fuel loads. And none of us today have really talked about the cost of that. And typically that's a cost of one treatment in some areas, which is fabulous. First of all, it's a shift in some agencies, and it's good to do that. But the reason we're also talking about grazing is because the animals have to eat year after year after year. And so there is a way to sustainably manage these landscapes without per se, there's people here that have businesses that want to be integrated in that solution. But, we can do this and manage the landscape. And with some of our agencies, they have cost shares to landowners. And a lot of times it's written in the contract that, and you must maintain this landscape for 10 years thereafter. And there's really no enforcement mechanism. And that's challenging, and some people can't afford it. But we have to take a look at all these, all the things that are happening, how we fund it, and how we maintain it. Because if we spend, I don't know how much money, CAL FIRE and the feds through Natural Resource Conservation Service have a tremendous program that does a lot of fuel load reduction. But, it's got to be in the hundreds and hundreds of millions, or maybe it's hit the billions. But we can't keep costing the state. So we have to create, with our knowledge and the leadership today, I'm hoping to carry this message back. And for those of you that work for agencies and you probably know what some of the roadblocks may be, please ask the question, privately or in this workshop. But it's that dialogue that we need to work on. And we're not saying grazing is perfect in every single state or circumstance. But if it's in the toolbox and it's more accepted or more understood, I think we have a far greater chance in restoring the resources of the state. So I just want to thank you and tell you that's part of the reason for us doing this.
My name's Don Watson. I also sit on the RMAC board. We graze about 5,000 acres in the North Bay with sheep and goats. And when you're running up against some obstacles in the initiation of this type of thing, pick up a small project. I think that's what's already been said. But come visit some of us that already do this. The public will be overwhelmingly in favor of it, but you will have obstacles in personalities, whether they don't like cattle on the range or they don't want sheep or goats on the range. But there's something really cool about the livestock. 99% of the people who show up and actually see the babies being born and running on the range, they'll come to love it. We have friends that have coffee and cookies prepared for them when they show up with their goats down on the peninsula. So you're going to get good PR out of it, but you're going to have people that are going to be a burr under your saddle.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jeannie Mesha from the State Water Board, and I appreciate all the information that that you've given today, and I've learned a lot. I think grazing is a good tool for fuels management. Working from the Water Board, my concern is water quality, and so, there's been a lot of talk about the timing and the intensity and the duration of grazing. And I'm just curious, what measures do you take to monitor the timing and intensity and duration? Are there like a minimum number of observations you do of your herds? How do you make sure that you're not overgrazing, overutilizing the land?
There has been an abundance of work done by UC Cooperative Extension, particularly by Dr. Ken Tate on rangeland water quality issues. You're probably familiar with some of that. As a grazing practitioner, what we have done on both some of the leased ranches and our home ranch is we have called things a riparian pasture. I am very opposed to close-up fencing of the riparian corridor. I think that's an absolutely waste of time and achieves nothing. But we've instead gone to riparian pastures, and basically we're in such a situation where we have ephemeral streams, and when that stream course ceases to flow, we'll save that pasture for later grazing. So there are a lot of things that you can do without fencing off that corridor in a very short period of time and very short distance to creek banks. And I think the management of those riparian areas can be enhanced by timing of grazing. If you have a perennial stream, certainly you can watch for the impacts on woody vegetation. When you start to see some woody vegetation impact, it's time to move the cattle out. But the ability to use riparian pastures, I think, is a very good way to manage riparian corridors and preserve and protect and enhance water quality. We've had a number of issues with supposed alleged water quality issues that have never really panned out to be attributed to livestock. One of the issues we had many years ago was a cryptosporidium issue with pathogen loading into the reservoirs that we were involved in managing. And as much as we tried to make the cryptosporidium part of the cattle deal, it just never worked that way. It turns out that feral pigs were more of a problem, and ground squirrels were more of a problem in spreading and carrying and shedding cryptosporidium than the cattle were. So I think riparian pastures and just a close observation on impacts on woody vegetation are tools that you can use to graze your riparian areas.
I just want to add, when I'm out doing service for hire, many times the agencies that I'm working for have environmental companies that are engaged with them that do the monitoring for them. And I think we have a few in our audience today that are from those type of agencies working for a client who are hired in part to monitor the grazing that the client is paying for. So we aren't necessarily the ones doing it. I'll tell you the way we do it is we watch carefully for erosion, and as I mentioned earlier, we're not gonna keep our animals any longer than we need to, because we're constantly avoiding erosion. We know that's not gonna be good for the client. They're not gonna want us back. We wouldn't do it on our home ground, so we're not gonna do it on your ground. And another thing I want to say, as far as this isn't exactly answer your question, but in the service provider model, part of the year you're paying for feed, and part of the year you're being paid to feed. So that means when we leave our feed grounds in the springtime and begin our paid grazing, we have to be very, very careful about what we're leaving behind. We have to leave enough behind to come back to something in the fall. So much of rancher and target grazers monitoring is really practitioner-based and experience-based, not scientifically based, but I would argue very, very efficient.
Can I add one more thing to that? At least on the Forest Service, to answer your question, permittees have, they have standards and guidelines that we have to meet, and they are physically carried out by our range con and written down. So whether it's a stubble height requirement or plant community requirement, these things are all, even though we have what they call adaptive management, they're pretty stringent in terms of what we have to do. We don't just go run out there and do anything we want.
Sure, I wanted to throw something on the end, but I'll let you go first by all means. Okay, so hang in mind. So one, I want to appreciate the question that was asked because I'm a scientist, so monitoring is a real keen interest of mine. So I want to add on the monitoring that one, so grazing for fuels management. So that's what I consider prescriptive practice. And same thing as with fire guys who are doing prescribed burn. There are specific parameters under which that operation should be done. And in my opinion, this is more tiny, but when these prescriptions are done, monitoring ought to always be a component of them, documentation of it. So whether it's regards to water quality, particularly, I'm also thinking about fuels. So if I'm contracting with Glenn to provide a service to remove fuels, I should have been talking to my fire guys and gotten their feedback on, all right, so here's the kind of fuels you had. These are the levels to which the fire staff are advising that we need to alter the fuels in the following ways. And so Glenn and I think that by using his livestock in a particular way and timing, that we can get the fuel altered within those particular parameters. I would be dropping the ball in a significant way were I not to go back and confirm at the conclusion of the treatment that we had not accomplished the objective. Okay. Now I know, in fact, that doesn't always happen. So, I mean, Andre's running a business, and the reason why she works with these agencies, and the agencies provide their own staff or they contract with someone else to do the objective determination of what was accomplished, because it makes sense in a business sense. So she could hire people to do it for her, but that's going to greatly increase the cost of the business. But my opinion is that monitoring should always be a part of these practices that we're doing, and especially since I do see the possibility that these grazing treatments and what I call grazing service enterprises are going to probably proliferate in the decade or two going forward. Should that happen, you can expect that we're going to see a wide range of competency and skill in the people who are providing the services. How is a person to know whether they're getting a good service or not? You must monitor. You must verify and validate that the work that you were promised, the person got it. And now it would be unfair to expect a person to hit it on the mark every single time, but the person should at least be good enough to know how to get it close to the mark on a fairly consistent basis. And it's only by monitoring that we're going to be able to accomplish that. I'm done.
That's perfect, because I'm an environmental monitor. All thousand weeks out of Paso Robles, so we're environmental consulting, and so we get hired, and we've worked on several large scale, 5,000 acre sites, often solar farms, but pretty much any type of project, residential to that. And we've seen great success with grazing. We were able to get approval from the water board at one of our sites to do some grazing in the waterways this time, because it was just, the drainages were just everywhere, even though very dry, mostly ephemeral drainages because where they are located. But so I've been out there taking the data. So I'm hoping that we'll get some stuff published. I mean, it's not a riparian corridor, but yeah, we'll have some really good data. I want to see, how it's affecting the banks and sediment input and blah, blah, blah. So we'll be doing some MAM, the MEM sampling and et cetera. And so we're keeping an eye on it. And yeah, so we are hired through the big project to monitor all the work. And I have to tell you, I was really skeptical about grazing at one of these sites because they implemented an above ground cable concept. So things are dangling around this, there's a different infrastructure for our outer structure, if I may, at one of the solar sites, and we have had no issues with the sheep. They've done a fantastic job. We've had manual and mowing implementation to help with fire reduction, and we've had incidences. Just leave it at that. But the grazing has worked really well. So we're hopeful to write a fire plan coming up soon, and so that's kind of why we're here. Aside from we just are constantly dealing with grazing as a tool. So we're on the environmental side, and we're pro grazing. We offer that in we write VMPs, and I think it's definitely one of our go-to tools for our clients. And so.
Thank you. And make sure that we put all the cards on the table. So those who are out there, including the water board staff and extension, the rest of us, we all know that the monitoring side is easy to talk about. It's probably the hardest single thing to actually implement the way that we know know that we should. By far, it is the most expensive, time-consuming thing that we always can find a reason for why we either short shift it or we don't do it at all. So I'm looking for ways that we can better coordinate and get this monitoring done because the fire guys. So remember Dave was up here talking about data. We need more data. We need more data. Well, what kind of data do they need? If there are grazing treatments being applied for fuels management, or we got ranching operations that are in areas that are considered strategic lands to buffer and protect communities, what do we need to know? We need to know something about how many animals were out there, what season of the year, what was the stalking intensity. Why? Because when the fire guys, CAL FIRE and FRAP go back to attempt to model the behavior of the fires, it's the fact that they don't have that data for grazed landscapes around California that is introduced lots of slop into their interpretations of the results. They don't know how many animals. As an animal nutritionist, I can run the numbers pretty fast and easy and tell you, you tell me how many cows and how heavy their average weight was, and how many months or weeks they're out in this field, I can give you a pretty good estimate of how many pounds of biomass that they removed from that site. But we don't know. Therefore, those numbers don't go in to the models to demonstrate what effect the grazing actually had. So all of us collaboratively working on these kinds of projects, the more that we can begin to pool some of this information will sharpen and tighten the models and help us to do a better job of determining exactly how to use grazing in a way that's going to accomplish the goals for which we have. Right. Lisa, Lance?
I just wanted to be fair and go back to the question about from the State Water Board, because I do work a lot with the water boards. And, you know, I know that when the water board, you know, decides or has policy or waste discharge orders or what have you, you know, they need to see data. So it was a really fair question, you know, what are we doing about water quality? And you did hear that in the rangeland, and especially on Forest Service lands, Dr. Ken Tate and Leslie Roach and the whole team has done some really remarkable work on it. But for those of you that may not be familiar, I just wanted to kind of give you a vision of what happens up on these Forest Service allotments. And I just came home Saturday night. I ride horses, so I like to ride with the ranchers up there. But I mean, to paint the picture, and this is a mid-elevation Forest Service allotment, about 3,500 to 5,500 elevation, so heavy brush, and pretty nasty actually. But to understand, cattlemen don't just turn their animals out and say, okay, I've got, you know, 6 weeks or 2.5 months and we'll be back. I mean, nowadays, because, you know, people live up in these areas and I mean, there can be conflict. So the cattlemen, in my opinion, are working 10 times as hard these days. And this one particular allotment I ride a lot on, they're there 3-4 times a week, and they're not big ranchers. They probably have 150 mother cows and their babies go up with them. And so they're going out in the number one a lot, but they utilize best management practices that have been proven. I just want to share that. And they in themselves are very protective of water quality, or certainly help that. They use herding, and if animals are staying in one area too long, we move them to a different area. Usually they move on their own, they get it. But I'm sorry, and back to the numbers, about 150 head are out on 30,000 acres plus, and they, you know, disperse. And so you might have 4 or 5 cows and their babies hanging out together here and there. So it's not like you're seeing a large impact in one area, number one. Number two, there's tons of best management practices, but, you know, we work with the Forest Service to develop some springs or some watering troughs and things in different areas. So they utilize the whole range, so they don't have to go to the creeks for water only. They salt away from water, so the animals will drift back up there and not hang on any particular water source. And, you know, those are the, you know, the ones that come to mind. But you're just not seeing heavy impact. That's a point I want to make. And they are up there a lot, and they get it with water quality. I mean, because I come from the resource background working with them, and they've heard you, they've heard concerns. The good news is there's science that's saying the waters are clean, generally. I forget if it was Tim or who mentioned cryptosporidium can be shed in young calves. So what they do, and this may be more on the home ranches and not so much up in the mountains, but then they don't use that particular area with young calves that have the potential to impact it. And so, there's a lot of things they know, and I just want to say that they're thinking about it all the time. As far as data, we have irrigated land stuff that we provide data all the time to you and Central Valley, which is I work with. But Ken Tate and UC Cooperative Extension has quite a bit of data up there from these grazing allotments, and I think it would be helpful to you if you weren't aware of that.
Right, and I'll add, if the water boards, any of the water boards ever are finding some data that's indicating that there are some specific problems, RMAC is very interested in seeing that and learning about it. So now, we're getting towards the end of this section. Audience, any other burning questions you have you'd like to have addressed? Lance?
You got two here.
Okay, all right. Go, let's, I'll make time for two. Yes.
Hi, my name is Mario. I work for Cal Fish and Wildlife, and I manage quite a few leases on wildlife areas and ecological reserves. And one of the questions that I have specifically is that I understand, and we also would like to have more grazing on our lands. In fact, we're bringing thousands of acres online that have never been grazed before. In case if someone is interested, we're advertising now for a lease that starts this coming Wednesday. The mandatory site visit is this coming Wednesday in the Yuba foothills, about 3,000 acres. But the point that I'd like to make is we have objectives for the wildlife areas that are beyond, fire reduction. We are trying to improve these wildlife areas for wildlife. And one of the things that I'd like to ask maybe is, does anyone have any idea how much grazing needs to be done in order to address the intensity of the fire, most likely, so that something can be done to fight this fire when it comes along, while at the same time maintain good habitat for wildlife? So we can't go all the way to the nubbins. What we do is we ask ranchers, for example, to put tubs close to houses so that the areas along houses get more impact. We ask them to put salt blocks closer to the fence lines where there's homes or private property, so that cows utilize those areas more. But what do you guys think? What can we do? And then a follow-up question with that, I know that Cal Fire specifically keeps track of fuel credits and removal of brush and all that kind of stuff. I heard him talk earlier about, how we don't know how many cows are in. We use Cal Fire a lot. I mean, thousands and thousands of hours of building fences on state land. And I'm curious whether Cal Fire takes the credits for those hours, because without them, we wouldn't be able to graze these areas in the first place.
I used to work in Yuba County as with cooperative extension, so I'm familiar with what certainly there is trade-offs, and so there's no easy answer. It's 2,000 pounds of biomass needs to be removed, but probably looking at the species of concern, your list, and then looking at what opportunities we can in those areas near homes that are approached. You could come up with a well-written plan of varying intensities of grazing to meet different objectives. Of course, closer to the homes, but again, your primary objective is wildlife function on that piece of property. So there's probably some objectives you could set up that would drive what level of grazing, timing, intensity, and duration that needs to occur to create that habitat. And then for the fuels, it's more, where do you want to go, or what trade-offs do you want to make on some of the wildlife habitat to get higher prevention for those homes that are now built against your wildlife area? It's not an easy answer. It's a variable, complex answer, I'll admit.
Yeah, that's a good question. The question's a good advertisement for CRMs.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, the question is solvable and addressable, but on a site-specific basis. So give me a place, give me a list of the wildlife species that's there you want to create habitat for. Let's bring the CAL FIRE guys in the room to sit down and look at the site with us and tell us what they think about what the appropriate fuels management would be. And now we, as a CRM or other professionals, we plan out, so what's the best way to integrate tools together to accomplish that specific kind of condition that you need. It's possible, but it's going to, it'll require the complex interaction of a number of people with information from different angles.
Doesn't mean any science already that's been published that looks at how much RDM on the ground will still, at what point will it reduce fire intensity? And it's, I know it's site specific, I realize that, but, we talk about 26,000 pounds, I think that Tim said it earlier. 1,200 pounds, 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds?
Right, but RDM itself was not meant for that. For those of you who don't speak this gibberish, so yeah. So all RDM is the pounds of dry biomass of dead grass, period. So the fire guys are gonna talk about fire modeling in terms of the biomass of fuel, so the density of the fuel, and then slope and winds and everything else on that site is gonna drive it. So I dispense with RDM. I just talk about biomass. And so the fire guys know biomass. We can talk about that density. So then in that case, they've got a model to say, in your site, in these conditions, this is what you need to reduce the fuels to. Now we're talking.
And I want to stick up for a few ranchers I've known over the past decades. There are some people who run cattle who can actually go out without any data and without anything more than understanding what the plant community is and what the soil type is, understanding the geography of the area, and give you an idea of how many cattle you can, and nothing against goats and sheep, but I'm just speaking from what I know right now. How many cattle you can put on an acre safely to start grazing, and then talk about how long it would take in terms of what you want to accomplish. We saw more than once up there, you can have one cow on 100 acres, you can have 100 cattle right there for one day, one cow for 100 days. You can make anything happen that you want. And it's kind of up to you. I will tell you from a cattle perspective, we're generally not the ones that want to go in there with a whole bunch of animals and come out, because it's not economical for us to do that. It's easier with the goats, I think, because they're all set up to do that, set up to move and whatnot. A lot of what our cattle do when they're grazing is, a lot of it is memory. It gets institutionalized generation through generation through generation of these cattle to go to certain areas, to know where water is, to know where particular plant types are and all of that. And I love all of my scientific buddies, but I do want to say there's an art form to that grazing, that there are some incredible people out there that they just have it. They know.
Well, we're talking chefs and sous chefs, right?
Yes, we
So
are.
all the scientists in the room, we're busy building recipes so we can farm out to everybody can look at the recipe and do it. There are some actual chefs who've been doing it for so long and many generations. It's not that the recipe doesn't exist for them, it's just that it's built into the wire. Okay, yes, next question.
I'm Tina Robertson. I work for East Bay Regional Park District as the vegetation program manager, and I think this is a quick question, 2 questions. For goats and sheep, it seems that there aren't a lot of producers, outfits that I can go to get proposals for having goats and sheep to reduce fuel.
Stephanie Larson is about to address that.
Okay, so is there a list? And then the other thing is there, I guess, supply and demand? Like, we get enough people asking that maybe some other people start providing that.
So that one's about to be addressed. Next question. Okay, great. All right, folks, thank you all. Do any of you have a closing thing you want to say as you're leaving? I'll give you a last chance. Nope? Okay, thank you very much.